Hi guys, I'm Betsy Datiri. I'm a psychotherapist and I just want to help us think through a little bit around grief. If you're in a situation where you have recently had the shock of losing somebody that you cared for, all sorts of things can happen to our body, to our mind, to our emotions. And when we don't understand it, it can be really very frightening. It can feel even more overwhelming, and we can become worried about ourselves in the midst of worrying about other people, and the whole experience can be overwhelming. So I just want to explain just a couple of things to help you in your situation feel less powerless to what's going on and more empowered to understand the kind of processes that you're probably going to have to go through and the kind of experiences which are really universally normal when it comes to different aspects of grief. So I want to start by looking at this thing called psychological shock. Psychological shock, it says here, it was like everything stopped and I had to remember to breathe. When I eventually saw others, I was confused about why the world was carrying on as if nothing had happened. Psychological shock can be caused from sudden news of somebody suddenly passing away, or it can still happen actually when we know that we've been journeying with somebody and then suddenly the end has come. Psychological shock is a sudden experience which it feels like the breath has been taken away from you. And psychological shock can last for quite a surprising period of time. And in that time, you could well feel like you're living in sort of an alter reality, slightly distanced from other people, like you're in automatic mode and you're carrying on with the tasks that you have to do to be a human, you know, like looking after your body, like drinking and eating and even doing your job. But fundamentally, you feel like you're in automatic mode. You feel like you're an autopilot because there's a part of you that's still in shock. Psychological shock can come in an instant and leave you just feeling like you're slightly in a fog. And it can make it very, very odd when you look around you at the world and they're shopping and they're laughing and they're queuing up to eat. And you think, why is the world carrying on like nothing's happened? Don't they know? Psychological shock hits our body. Our body can feel quite numb. Our emotions can just feel stuck. And we think, my goodness, maybe I should be crying. Maybe I should feel angry. Maybe I should feel sad, but I don't feel anything. And that's normal in psychological shock. Really, that says that you are trying to take in the piece of information, but it's hit you on such a deep level that really you're in overwhelm. And the only way that the psyche and your body knows how to cope is to go into this state of shock where you just automatically keep surviving. You keep going around. But what you'll find is different aspects of yourself sort of spring back into life, and you suddenly find yourself thinking and thinking thoughts about what's happened and worries and anxiety and what if it happens to someone else, and little aspects of grief pop up. Or you might feel sudden emotions, but rather than them sort of starting at naught and building up to 60, they can suddenly hit you like a ton of bricks. You can just be shopping. You could be just watching TV. You could just be sitting down to have a meal, and suddenly you have this overwhelming sense of sadness and loss. And the important thing is that actually you don't feel ashamed about that. You don't feel shocked about that, but you almost welcome that emotion in. Maybe you need to take yourself off to another room. Maybe you need to pull in if you're driving. Maybe, you know, if you're teaching or in a classroom or in a different job environment, maybe at that point you do need to, you know, just wait and regulate, breathe for a little bit. And then as soon as you're able to, pop into the toilets and just let some of that emotion out, feel some of that emotion. Because what we don't want is for people who are in psychological shock to stay numb for years and years. That's unhealthy, because then it's difficult to even feel happy. It's difficult to feel excited. It's difficult to feel pleased with anything because you've numbed all your emotions. So it's important to validate feelings that you have, but also recognize that when shock comes, it can be very, very overwhelming and numb everything. This next slide just helps us think through a little bit about our brain. I'm not sure how much you understand about the brain, but essentially what happens in a very simplified way is that our brain has got here, this front part of our brain is our cognitive brain. We call it the prefrontal cortex or the neocortex, excuse me. And this thinking brain, it's thinking, it's rational, it's able to negotiate, to think, to reflect, to ponder. But then we've got this limbic brain in the middle, and that's where all our emotions are working from. They're activated all in the middle here, and also our relationships. And then we've got two amygdala in the middle, which are our fear centers, really. And then right at the back, we've got a brainstem, and the brainstem is our primitive automatic brain. So if we have a sudden shock, if we're suddenly shocked by something, what happens is our primitive back brain can kick into gear, and it keeps us breathing, and it keeps us able to stay alive. It reminds us to eat. It can keep us on track. But this part of the brain generally has a lot less neural activity. So if we're in psychological shock, we can actually find it really difficult to make decisions. We can find it really difficult to think or to analyze. And you might be further shocked by that. Maybe you've got a job or a situation in your life where you have to be really fast at making decisions, and suddenly you feel like your brain is slower. That's a normal part of grief. It's a normal part of psychological shock. It's a normal part of feeling overwhelmed with big feelings. So don't worry about it. Be kind to yourself, and eventually you can learn how to get this part of your brain back on. But when you're aware of it, usually that's almost enough. You can go, hang on, I can't think straight. Like, you'll find yourself sometimes rubbing your head here. You'll be like, I can't think straight. I don't even know what to do. I can't make that decision. Oh, I just feel quite like I'm walking in fog or mud. And at that point, you can slow down. You can breathe. And as you breathe deeply, you can actually allow yourself to slowly begin to panic less. And then your rational brain will come back on. But we need to recognize that when we feel anxious, when we feel scared, when we feel nervous, and often we can actually feel anxious about our trauma symptoms, about our symptoms of grief. And so if we feel anxious about those, then actually that can switch off that part of our brain even more. So what we need to do is just recognize that grief is a little bit like riding the waves. They come, they go, they get big, they get small. And the best thing to do is to allow ourselves to feel what we need to feel, to express what we need to express, whilst remaining within the important roles that we hold, where we want to stay consistent and predictable for those around us. So it just means more nipping to the toilet, more driving the longer way round, more outside walks. Maybe you walk your dog twice a day, not once a day. Just taking those extra few minutes for yourself, just to allow this part of your brain to fully process, or begin to fully process, what's going on. There's a little picture of the brain. You can also see the Broca's area is right bang in the middle of our frontal lobes here. And so very often we really struggle to put things into words. Have you ever tried when somebody says, how are you feeling? And you're like, I don't even know where to begin. That's a normal part of feeling overwhelmed in psychological shock or in grief, that you can't find the words. And so we need to just recognize that many of us might be feeling that, and rather than force words, just go, oh, right now I'm not sure I can put it into words, but thank you for asking. You see, a lot of people will find that actually they have this incredible need to be with people, because actually very often grief and bereavement and psychological shock can make you feel very lonely. It can make you feel very abandoned and very isolated and unseen, especially if you're looking out and everyone else seems to be happy and you're the only one that feels like, oh my goodness, like, oh, what's going on with me? but you might often feel that you want to be with people, but you don't want too many questions. You don't want people to put pressure on you. And so you're tempted to hide from people. And that's very normal. That's a normal reaction. And I think it's really important to try with the people that you care for to just explain, oh, I feel this conflict. I desperately want to be with people. I really want to go out and have meals. I really want to go and be with people because it makes me feel better. But equally, I'm a little bit nervous about questions, or even people being too kind to me might make me cry, or people being too empathetic. And I'm wondering how you're feeling. I don't know. So it's normal to have that conflict. Emotions are tricky, aren't they? Emotions can feel so big and so uncontrollable, and we can feel quite powerless to our emotions. And so I think it's important to recognize that actually emotions can feel scary. But what we also need to recognize is if we don't allow ourselves to feel anything and we just repress it and push it down, that actually is the beginning of a volcano, and that volcano will erupt at some point, and it might erupt on someone you care for, you love, or it might just erupt on yourself. It might destroy something. And so it's really important to respect our emotions and allow just a little bit to come up at a time. And again, as I said earlier, the best way to do that is to do those extra little walks outside where the air and the beauty of your environment can really help bring a sense of calm. But also those having coffee or meeting up with somebody you know understands this journey. So they're not going to pressure you. They're not going to say, aren't you over it yet? They're not going to say anything that could really cause a little bit more shock. But instead, they're going to be safe to just be with. Because sometimes words are too much, but you need to be with somebody. And that enables you to feel sad. Because sometimes feeling sad on your own can feel quite overwhelming. But if you can feel sad with somebody else and just let some tears flow, then actually you feel a little bit more together with somebody and less isolated and alone. It's hard having the energy to feel. And in our Western society, very often we tend to be quite quick on pushing down our feelings and pretending we're fine. But actually, it's important to respect our feelings and slowly feel our feelings. I don't know whether you've experienced flashbacks, but they can be quite scary if you don't understand what they are. A flashback is well, it says sometimes it's like an old memory just comes back and overtakes my mind. It's like it never happened. And so what can happen is somebody can be doing their daily life. Let's say I was just, I don't know, making the lunch and chopping vegetables, or, you know, spreading bread or something, and I'm just tootling along. And then all of a sudden, as I chop the sandwich in half, bam, a memory comes back of when I was with the person that I care for and when we were making sandwiches together. And it can just hit me like a ton of bricks. And it can make my body feel very heavy and very overwhelmed. It can make me want to run away. It can make me want to curl up in a corner, or it can make me feel very cross, but it can also make it feel like it's happening now. And then you're like, but it's not happening now. Flashbacks are quite difficult to comprehend when they happen to us, because it's difficult to know whether we're in the here and now or whether we're in the past. And so when we recognize how scary flashbacks can be, because they usually are in our body, they're body memories or emotional memories. They're not so visual. They might be triggered by a visual memory, but they're actually on all sorts of other levels. And that's actually really important to recognize that actually that is a flashback, and the flashback is something which is coming back to just help you process a past event. Eventually they'll stop, but it's trying to tell you, your subconscious is trying to tell you to take a little bit of time to process past memories. I've already explained really that words can fail you. And it's really difficult to put into words how you might be feeling or what might be going on for you. But it's also quite important to try without any pressure. So some people find that actually just writing one or two words and then decorating it can be helpful. Some people find that writing a journal, so a diary over the weeks and the days and the months that pass, can be really helpful to help a sense of timeline, so you don't feel like you're losing aspects of your timeline, of your past. For some people, they need to write poetry, they need to write songs, they need to write things that express their relationship with the person that they care for, who has now passed away. Words are really important, but answering very harsh questions like, how do you feel now? Aren't you over it yet? What are you doing to help yourself feel better? All of those are really difficult, unhelpful questions. But trying to express something that you feel using even one word or several words in a creative way can be very, very helpful. So I hope that's just given you a couple of thoughts around grief and what normal things happen to normal people when we are in psychological shock, when we've lost somebody we really cared for, when we're so shocked that they passed away, and our body, our emotions, our mind, and who we are is impacted. So be kind to yourself, take your time. Do seek help if you really feel like it's interrupting your ability to live your life. And I hope that this was helpful. Bye.